There's no pressure. Like you come back to the place that you loved and went to 25 years ago, and you get to meet and reconnect with wonderful people and talk about what got you passionate about what you do every day. So I'm like over the moon to be here and talking with all of you and sharing that, because sometimes, you know, you start on your journey and you're young and you don't think about anything and other people, and you just move on with your life, and then suddenly you get a little older and you're like, wow, there were some amazing people in my world that helped me get to where I am today. So in a way, this presentation, I got to do something I would normally never do, which is share a little bit about my journey as a way to talk about peace building, because it's been one of my passions for the last 21 years working at CRS. And the reason I ended up working at CRS is because of what happened here at Emory and what I learned. So it's a great way to say thank you to this incredible institution that has blessed me and members of my family. And so I thought, wow, let's try and give this a go. So I'm going to talk to you at first about a little bit of how I got to CRS, a little bit about who CRS is, and then I'm going to share with you the story of what we discovered over the last 20 years about peace building. Because we've been on a journey for 20 years about really figuring out what is peace building and how does it work. And then I want to share with you an incredible project that we're doing. And it's not a massive project, but it has just inspired me by learning about it over the last few weeks, and I just thought this is the place that I want to share it, because it's the perfect example of how an organization learns and learns and learns, and then something special happens. So I grew up just outside of Plains on a peanut farm, so there's a peanut. And I say that one of the problems I had growing up is that when you grow up in a rural area and the President of the United States is elected from 5 miles down the road, it kind of skews your view of reality for the rest of your life, because you're like, wow, well, the president could be elected from like next door. But okay, so I started out there, ended up at Emory with studying religion and anthropology, had a great start for people who encouraged me to do public service and people who encouraged me to learn more about the world. So I ended up in India for a year studying religion. So I got a chance to broaden my horizon. And I think that's really important as we think about the world as really a very small place. But if you don't get out there and meet people, you don't really learn that. And I ended up very much involved in campus ministry. And that became really important to me. I ended up with my first job in college working at the Aquinas Center, which was wonderful. And so when Phil asked me to come back, I'm like, well, how can you say no to like your first employer? It's like, yeah, you better say yes. And worked with a great team there at the time, a few years ago. And also really experienced a loving community of people in campus ministry that kind of nurtured my love of the church. So I ended up in campus ministry, getting married at Cannon Chapel. So, I mean, you know, how much closer to like home can you be? Got married at Cannon Chapel 25 years ago and moved to Houston with my husband and ended up in campus ministry. But for those of us who are active people in the world, you have to have a lot of faith in planting seeds to be in ministry. It's not for everyone. And I kind of learned that. I learned that I was one of those people who liked seeing things happen. And I had a little trouble believing that all those wonderful seeds that you plant, you know, I just couldn't see them growing. And it made me like, I really need to be in a place where I can hopefully be a change agent. So I started looking for graduate programs, ended up doing a graduate degree in international development, and ended up after graduate school at CRS. So for those of you who are thinking of graduate school, might one day want to work at an organization like CRS, I'll talk to you afterwards. I'll tell you how I got there, because we have a great sort of young professionals program. And that's what started me on the journey to CRS. So this is a picture from World War II. CRS has been in existence. Catholic Relief Services started out as War Relief Services during World War II. Our first project, if you can imagine, was moving refugees from Poland to Mexico. That doesn't make sense in today's world, but that's what happened. There was a group of Polish refugees who were in a village in Mexico that welcomed them as refugees. So a story about refugees being welcome in unexpected places. And we went on to become CRS. We are the official humanitarian agency of the U.S. Catholic community. So for those of you who are Catholic, we are your organization. We are in service to both U.S. Catholics and people of goodwill who want to see something change in the world. We're part of a federation called Caritas International that is 165 members strong from the north and the south. So all over the world you will find Caritas, and we are part of that. And we have 1,100 partner organizations, some Catholic, some local government, some local NGOs. And our mission is to serve the most poor and vulnerable, no matter what, whoever they are, wherever we find them. This is a map of where we work. All those colored places that aren't purpley blue are where we work. It's actually now up to 117 countries starting this year. We colored them by the regions and the way we group them, but that doesn't really matter to you. It's just a lot of people that we serve in a lot of different places with some really incredible local partners. So it's very nice that I'm telling you this story, but you should know that there are a lot of CRS people who make these stories possible. So I'm, in a sense, representing them and some of the great partners that we work with. So one of the questions you always have is like, okay, well, what's different about CRS? I mean, you could go to a meeting. There's some wonderful organizations out there, CARE, World Vision, SAVE, Mercy Corps. They do great work. So at the end of the day, the question is, what's the differentiator? What is it that makes you different? What do you care about that might differentiate the work you do? And we talk a lot about the idea of integral human development. And that means that we want to think in our work about the whole person, the whole community. We don't want to take a single sector approach. And that doesn't really mean that those other organizations don't do great work and don't think about that. It's just to say for us, it's essential. That sense of what is happening in a community, how can we respond? If we do water, are we making sure that other key issues that are going to keep that water project from being successful are being thought about? And are we really taking into account the human person and their dignity and involvement in our work? So we just have some ideas that it's about what we do to help people diversify their assets on this right side, rebuild assets when they're lost, make sure they increase assets, whatever those are. They're human assets, whether they could be financial, they could be their own personal capability. An asset can also be your health. It can be your resilience. Also, how do we advocate and reduce risk? How do we help people with their rights? How do we help people cope with loss? So when we go into programs, these are kind of the questions that we're asking ourselves. These are kind of fundamental. And hopefully, my teaser is if you stay in this room long enough to hear about the project I want to tell you about, I'm hoping that these are the kind of things you'll see in that project and it'll make sense to you about how we work. Because the dilemma is, because we work in all sectors, we do agriculture, we do health, we do water and sanitation, we do child education, we do peace building, we do economic livelihoods. It's very hard to make an organization so complicated that does 800 projects a year real. So I thought, well, let's just take one and see at the end if it makes sense to you who we are and what we do. So we're going to be on a quick little journey. I decided I would tell you a little bit more about myself in terms of how my work aligned to the changes in CRS's thinking about peace building. So peace building for us is cross-cutting. We don't think of it as a standalone work. We think of it as something we bring to all of our work, but it's evolved. It started after the Rwandan genocide. And it started with our own realization that we had been working in Rwanda for 40 years before the genocide, and we didn't know it was coming. We missed it. You're thinking, how could you be in Rwanda? How could you be doing child welfare projects? How could you be doing economic strengthening, agriculture, and not see it? Well, the answer is, if you aren't thinking about the whole picture, if you're not thinking about structures of injustice and ways that the way people are living is breaking down their communication and relationships, you don't see it. You have to ask yourself, what am I missing? So we came up with an approach that was called the justice lens, the idea that if you put on spectacles and you looked at the world with a question about what are the structures of injustice that might be preventing us from succeeding, that we might think about projects entirely differently. And so my first experience in CRS, I was in the Philippines. I went overseas and had been married for 4 years, and my husband said, yeah, sure, sounds like an adventure, let's go. So we got a stipend, we didn't even get paid. We were living on like, I don't know, maybe $7 a day or something, but we were like, yeah, this is like exactly what we want to be. We want to be living, we want to go and see this adventure of who is this organization CRS and what do they do. And we were sitting in a meeting in the Philippines, and the projects that we were working on in the Philippines were coming to an end. And the question came up, well, what are we going to do next? What is it that we're about in the Philippines? And we realized that if we started thinking about the Philippines with a justice lens, suddenly it became clear that there was a civil war going on in the Philippines. Now, I don't know how we could be programming in the Philippines for decades with a civil war going on and not ever have engaged in that civil war. We didn't try and help end it. So this is exactly how we ended up in trouble in Rwanda. And we were like, whoa, wait, we're sitting in a room. There's a problem in the Philippines about how Muslims and Christians are living together. They're fighting each other. They're killing each other. What can we do? So we started a peace building program in the Philippines that brought together Muslims and Christians, and there are indigenous people called Lumad people in the Philippines. And we said, anything we do going forward in Mindanao has to be about bringing people, diverse people together. So our first learning on this peace building journey was you have to put on those justice lens, you have to see the world and ask those questions. The second thing we learned was you have to be diverse. You have to bring people who are different together, and especially around religion, which is such a unifying force and a vital part of culture in so many countries. This picture is taken from Central African Republic, which if you read the news, and it's very sad, it is a country that is war-torn. It's just gone through a coup over the last few years, Muslims and Christians killing each other. This is the commitment of leaders in Central African Republic to say, we believe in peace, and we will work together, Catholic bishops, Muslim imam, and evangelical preachers, to form a way forward for our country. So interfaith work is important. I ended up, after the Philippines, moving on to another aspect, in Indonesia. And Indonesia is a beautiful country. I mean, if you never have a chance to go there, that's too bad. This is Borobudur, which is a Hindu monument. If you can imagine, it was covered. They didn't even know it existed. It was like centuries old, and suddenly a farmer found one of the stupas sticking out, and it's literally like 10 stories high. And they saw a stupa sticking out, and somebody started digging, and they found it. So this is the middle of civilization for Asia. And yet, they really struggled in Indonesia with social cohesion. Social cohesion is kind of that story of peace building, which is how are people knit together? How do people feel about each other? How do people talk to each other? Do people who live next door have conversations, or do they avoid each other? Do people intermarry? Do their kids play together? And one of the things that we were challenged with in Indonesia was, how do we keep people connected? How do we build those sense of connections? So we realized it's not just about bringing diverse groups together, but it's about how you bring them together so they feel connected. And so this is a project that looked at kids' youth groups and got them to play sports together and mixed the clubs so that they weren't all from one group playing the other, but they were mixed together, embracing the idea of sports. In Indonesia, we brought really diverse groups together to do infrastructure projects. So they redid roads, they helped rebuild clinics, they did things that the community needed. And through that, learned that they could be together and they could enjoy each other's company. So social cohesion is really important. So the last piece of our journey as CRS, this is a picture from Africa. The little critters in the middle are my daughters, who are now teenagers, so they don't even look like that, but I thought it was a cute picture. They were once upon a time that small, and we lived in Zambia, which is in Central Africa. It's a beautiful country, full of wild animals, so we never let them any farther than that out of our sight, because there were lions and leopards and all hyenas, all manner of things. So one of the things we learned in Zambia was that you have to help people heal from trauma. That you can't simply just help people move on. You need to help people heal. And we learned that in Zambia, in particular, after the AIDS crisis. When I arrived in Zambia with my family, it was 2001. And every day, in Zambia, which was a country of 12 million people, 300 people died from HIV. Every day. It was like a Boeing 747 fell out of the sky every single day. They couldn't keep up. They couldn't dig graves fast enough. It was the unspoken crisis, and of course, everyone was traumatized. So it isn't a civil war, and yet moving on from that, once we had treatment and helping people, meant people had to heal. And we learned that in crisis, this is from Central African Republic, that we had to help people heal. That it wasn't simply about communities, it wasn't simply about groups of people, it was about individuals. And you think, well, why didn't we start with that? But somehow in development, sometimes we think about things in big picture, and we stop realizing that it is the individual, it is that human being. It is their life and their human dignity has to be the starting point. And this is a program that brings together people who have been in communities in Central African Republic where maybe they've killed someone in that community. It's not easy. And they bring them into a meeting and they talk about healing and they work on trauma healing. And over time, they actually find a way to forgive. It's not easy, but it's also possible. So these were the things I've talked about: justice lens, interfaith, social cohesion, trauma healing. So the next piece for us was to develop an approach. And this is just a simple representation to say that it begins at the individual level. You have to heal. You have to find a way to help people address their prejudice and really own it. Then you have to, so that's binding. Then you have to have bonding, which is how do you help people from within the same group heal and come back together? And only then can you have bridging, which is how do you help people reach out across those divides? So that became for us kind of a model of how we think about peace building. And the addition we made, and you don't have to, this is just like this is Cooper Ryder, is a gentleman who's thought up this idea called appreciative inquiry. And the way you have to do this is you have to help people dream. Because all those things that we were talking about things that divide and things that break people down, if you can't help, they get caught in their minds in a negative space. They think, I can't move on, I can't forgive, I can't do more, and that stops them from moving forward. So the whole idea of appreciative inquiry is to give space to the idea that you can dream, you can design a future, you can hope for something and make it happen. And that, mixed with your personal healing, your group healing, and your idea of bridging between two groups, can then become a very powerful force. And that's what I'm going to talk about in our project that I want to share with you. But before I go there, I've kind of given you a lot, talked about a lot of ideas. So what I'd like to do is ask for you, hopefully it's not too far out of your comfort zone, to turn to somebody next to you. And the question I have is, does this make sense to you? Does this feel like something you think would work? Does this feel like something, if you applied it to something here in the US, a problem or a lack of peace, or, you know, there's so much going on right now in the US, would this work? And I'm not saying you have to say yes, I'm just saying talk to each other and then we'll take some questions. So if you have ideas that come up in your conversation, we'll just take, 5 or 6 minutes, share some things with each other, and then I'll bring us back to ask questions. Over to you for a few minutes. Maybe another 30 seconds if you have some questions or comments. Okay, we'll come back. I'm glad you guys had great conversations. This is great. Any thoughts you want to share from your group conversations or questions that came up in this great flurry of guests? And do we need to use the mics? Okay, you might not speak if I give you a microphone. Is that it? Okay, go ahead.
I came from Southeast Europe, and in
yes.
this country it's very hard when you speak not about religion, but we have ethnicity problem.
Yes.
We have Serbian and Kosovo, we have Macedonian and
yes.
Albanian also. And usually the approach that is done in my country is that you put two people from diversity together, and it is not successful.
Right.
The model that you have brought is very interesting, and I think that it is starting from the model that it is a social ecological model, that in the beginning you start to work with individual, and after that you go further.
You build
work
out.
the networking in the seminar, and after that you bring the people together, but you work in the same clan together, in
yes.
individual and in networking, and it is very nice.
Thank you. No, thank you. Other comments or questions? Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating feedback. And I think that is the challenge of all of us who work in the space of peace building is, do you start with the grass tops? Do you start with the grassroots? where do you start when you're thinking about peace building? And it's a challenge, right? If you only start at the grass tops, what if those people get it, but nobody who works at the grassroots gets it? And if you start only at the grassroots, but you're not talking to the people at the top, how do you make that link happen? So I think many of us have tried to do both, sometimes with mixed success. But it is, I think, the part that you have to think through as you develop a peace building approach. Yes? Yes.
Versus other organizations maybe more challenged to be able to bring the impact in. So that how we can become the efforts of organizations such as CRS is great.
Well, we hope. I mean, I think that's what we hope for organizations at their best, is that non-governmental organizations are trying to bring something that maybe for-profit organizations or governments might miss. And ideally at our best, that's what we do. So I'm going to go on and give more time for questions. So if something comes up to you in your mind after you see the next part, we'll have some time for questions in a few minutes. I started preparing for this presentation, and as I said, I've been doing peace building work for 21 years with CRS in all kinds of different places, traveling in many different environments. But I was meeting with our peace building team, and I asked them to tell me kind of what's going on right now in the space, because I don't always work in this space anymore. So sometimes you kind of lose track, and they were like, oh my God, there's this project. You really need to hear about this project. And I was like, I mean, okay, I have a lot of experts who I work with, and they always have a project, right? You're like, okay, but I know you always have a favorite project, but is this really like a serious project? And so they started telling me about it, and I was like, oh my God, this is a great project. So I decided that I would focus on this project with you this evening, and it's called COSOPAX. And the history is that it's taking place. So if you remember, I started us out in Rwanda with the genocide. Well, the Rwandan genocide really had a terrible impact on the whole Great Lakes area. The Great Lakes, you see the lakes, Lake Victoria, Lake Tanganyika, and those lakes surround Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo. And it happened that after the genocide, people fled, the Hutus fled into Congo, and this red area around Goma was where the conflict moved to. So Eastern Congo had 2 wars that followed the Rwandan genocide, where they think over 1 million people were killed as well. So it's been a terrible time. And as you might even know if you read the news, Burundi recently had a terrible coup, whatever you want to call it, definitely a mess. So this area is not an easy area to live in. And the people who live in this area, they often think of each other in those terms because people they love have been killed by people who are from that other place. So they're afraid, they have great loss, they've lived through decades and decades. So since '94 till today, it has been a disaster zone in our world that often gets completely overlooked. So you start thinking, well, what kind of peace building project can you do there? Because definitely there's more than enough need. And we have tried for many years to start at the grass tops. We have tried to bring Catholic bishops together. We've tried all kinds of strategies. And finally, our group 2 years ago decided to try something different. And they decided to start looking at women who are traders. Now, I'm talking about like cross-border traders. And these women, like little small trading, like they do like, $5 a day worth of trading. Like they carry something from one border, go to across the border and sell it in another country, come back home with some other stuff, sell it. I mean, they're just small. They don't do big selling. They're not big business women. But we decided, well, they cross those borders every day. And they have to function in those environments every day. So these are women from Uvira. So this project started 2 years ago in the border areas of Uvira and Bukavu, which is Congo diocese, and in Rwanda diocese and Burundi. And they chose 60 women, 15 from each diocese. And they said, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to do peace building from the binding, bonding, and bridging. But in addition, because we are thinking about these women and what they need, we're also going to do economic strengthening. So we're going to build their capacity to both save. So we do savings and lending groups where people save in groups. And we're going to help them do that and help them with their businesses. And it has, so this is like what they do, right? This is not like a big shop. There's not a fancy store. There's not a like fancy boutique. They just sell small little things. They cross the border. They buy something. They cross back. But these women, something fabulous happened with these women. We brought them together 4 times a year for a day, and we started working on how do you, and these are mixed, right? These women are women who, they know somebody from the group that is in the room with them at night had a family member who killed one of their family members. So we're not talking about, like, I don't like what you say. We're talking about, I don't even know if I can fall asleep at night because you're in the same room with me. So these were women who had nothing in common, even within their group may not even have felt any common identity. And yet there's this belief that what if this works? What if we bring these women together and we try this methodology, because nothing else seems to be working at building linkages across these borders. These communities across these borders, we are not making progress if we go to just the grass tops. What if these women could change the dynamic? So we started bringing them together. We made sure that they had these savings and lending groups, which doesn't mean we give them any money. And they started out with these savings and lending groups, and literally, you know, maybe they could lend a couple dollars. It's like not a lot of money. But over the last 2 years, they have saved so much that their average loan now is $1,500. So they have embraced this idea. They have taken it on and taken it to places we didn't even think people would take it to. So they've embraced that part. They've embraced what does it mean at the individual, at the group, across the group, this idea of social cohesion. So what are some of the results? This woman, her name is Miss Rosette. And what they did to help me sort of prepare, they said, oh, no, you can't just hear from us. So last week, I was on a Skype video call with Rosette and a woman named Francoise that I'll introduce you to. And they told me their story. They were one of these 15 women. And Rosette shared that, you know, before she came into this, she couldn't even talk to the people that she saw across the border. She couldn't negotiate for any of her business. And she was always afraid. So when she moved from Rwanda to Burundi, she was scared every minute that she was there. And yet that was her business. That's what she had to do every day. And she said, what has changed is that I now go to marriages and weddings and services and celebrations. These people now have called me sister. I now have something from this process where now when I cross over, I have 15 people I can stay with. I know they will welcome me in their home. She said, this has absolutely changed my relationship at home with my family. I am now bringing my family members into knowing these people. She said, when I started, my daughter said, you can't go there. Those people are going to kill you. You can't go into a meeting with those people. How will you go to sleep at night? And now I'm in a place where I can invite these people to my home when they cross the border. So a complete change of these women from being fearful and worried and angry to actually seeing themselves as change agents. And these are not like highly educated people. It's like, oh, well, we needed to find somebody with a high school degree or something. These are people who actually, if you talk to Francoise, so these are some of the things that happened. A more harmonious relationships at home, mobilizing their families and communities to understand these people and to welcome them. They started mediating conflicts. We had taught them some conflict resolution skills, and suddenly business people were coming, can you talk to these people and help us mediate a conflict in the market? And they experienced personally a reduction in fear. But then you started looking at the business, and this is Francoise. Yes?
Are there any language barriers here? Or are these all pretty much speak?
They all speak French officially. but they all have their own individual languages. So probably they use French as a trading language, but they really don't speak the other group's language. So that is a huge barrier. There was one story about how two women who were from different groups ended up together sharing a room. And over the time, they started to communicate, but then they started to communicate in nonverbal ways, in that one of the women was going to take her shower and she asked the other woman to take care of her baby. And she said, when that happened, suddenly I saw this whole situation in a different way. So I think it's that you have to overcome those things. You're right. There's always something that is a barrier, whether it's cultural or religious. We didn't just bring Catholics in. We also had Muslims. We also had Christians. So that is a barrier sometimes in and of itself. That's how these people think, or that's how these people are. So yes, I think there's lots of things they had to overcome. When Françoise talked about what she learned, she explained that when she started out, she and her husband would fight all the time. He never knew where her money was going. And she said, actually, I was very disorderly about my business. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't actually know how to keep records. And through these savings and lending groups, I started learning how to keep records. And now we get along. We actually can put business plans together. We can plan together. I actually can talk to my husband about things that we want to do for our family. So I think it had a huge impact on their ability to function, this idea of stronger bridges. So you're not just building the idea of bridges, but you're building them on women who have become stronger. They've become more professional. They've learned what it means to improve business management skills, have more respect in the community because they're stronger business women. They've increased household income. So to me, this was like, wow, this is what we're trying to do in development. Not every day do we actually achieve this. And sometimes we have to sort of say, well, what is it? And how far are these people going to take this project? So some of the things they've done that are pretty phenomenal is not just that they learned how to do economic work in the home and then expand it to their business. They didn't just learn peace building and build bridges individually. They have now become grass tops. They now have speaking to the bishops. ASEAC is the Central African Episcopal Conference, so it's all the bishops' conferences from Central Africa, invited them to speak. They said, we're hearing about this project. It really seems to be doing things that we have never been able to achieve in our work. So tell us about why this works. So they went and spoke to the bishops. They have convened, if you can believe it, the customs officials from the 3 countries that they crossed the border and convinced them to change the customs forms because nobody was filling them in correctly and they didn't know how to do them right. And they said, look, we really have to improve these customs forms. So they convinced them. Now they have new customs forms and people are filling them in more accurately. And they've embraced the idea of being ethical businesswomen. So not only do they see themselves as businesswomen and women who can grow, but they say, we want to be women who follow the law, but we want to make sure the law works. So we want to get these customs officials to improve the system so that we can adhere and be in line and not be illegal. So it's a fascinating project. I don't think we can claim much. I think these are phenomenal women, and we got really lucky to bring them together. We had an approach that helped them heal and helped give them a view of the world. But I think they're probably, being from a faith-based organization, I can say there are probably bigger factors at work here than just our work. I think these were important people to be bringing, and they brought a lot with them. And by healing, they have moved things forward in their country. So I hope some of what you heard in that project, going back to sort of this idea of how we work, that it kind of gels, that you kind of say, oh, well, what does this really mean? It means you have to care about their ability to work, their ability to succeed as women who are business women, also their ability to heal, and their ability to be actors in their own development. So I can't end a Catholic talk without talking about Pope Francis. I mean, it's not every day that you get such an amazing Pope who talks about exactly what this is about. So the dynamics of history and the diversity of ethnic groups, societies, and cultures, we see the seeds of a vocation to form a community composed of brothers and sisters who accept and care for one another. But this vocation is frequently denied and ignored in a world marked by a globalization of indifference, which makes us slowly inured to the suffering of others and closed in on ourselves. And I guess what I took away from this story was that actually, if these women can do this, if they can move forward from fear and indifference, then how much more could we do here? Like every day it feels that it's harder and harder, and yet I think if they can do it, then maybe there's something for all of us to think about as we go forward. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'll be happy to take questions.